A 61-year-old cancer survivor named Helen attends her own retirement party only to discover that the company she built over 30 years was secretly transferred into her nephew Marcus's name while she was undergoing chemotherapy. The betrayal cuts even deeper when she learns her husband David orchestrated it behind her back. Before we start further, please take a moment to subscribe our channel and drop a comment from where you are watching us. Marcus looked guilty before I even knew there was a reason for guilt. That was the first thing I noticed at my retirement party. Not the champagne towers, not the string quartet in the corner pretending this was the kind of company that had always been elegant instead of desperate. Not the giant photograph projected behind the stage of me 30 years earlier standing inside our first warehouse with my sleeves rolled up and dust on my face and absolutely no idea what I was doing. I noticed Marcus, standing beside my husband, looking at me like a man who had accidentally left a body visible through a shallow grave. And the strange thing was that the guilt vanished the second he realized I had seen it. He smiled immediately. Too quickly. Teeth first, eyes second. That is how I knew something was wrong. You learn things running a company for 30 years. You learn that lies arrive a fraction of a second late. Real emotions come first. Performances follow behind them. The ballroom smelled like roses and warm wine and polished wood. Someone had spent too much money on gold fabric draped over the walls. My name glowed across the giant screen behind the podium. Helen Marsh, founder, visionary, legacy. I remember staring at the word legacy while applause moved through the room like rain against glass. Legacy is a dangerous word. It means people have already started speaking about you as if you are finished. David stood near Marcus with one hand on his shoulder. My husband looked handsome for 63. Silver hair, navy suit, calm smile. The kind of face people trusted instinctively. I had trusted that face for 34 years. At the time, I still did. Rita sat near the stage, turning her wine glass slowly between her fingers. My oldest friend, 60 years old, sharp eyes, smarter than everyone in most rooms, and patient enough to hide it. When she noticed me looking at her, she raised her glass slightly. There was something odd in her expression, too. Not guilt exactly. Nervousness. What I didn't know yet was that nervousness can become betrayal if it stays silent long enough. A vice president I barely tolerated gave a speech about my resilience. Cancer survivor, pioneer, inspiration. People love those words when they are standing safely outside your suffering. They polish your pain into something motivational. I smiled in all the correct places. I thanked people. I hugged employees who cried harder than I had during chemo. And every few minutes, my eyes returned to Marcus, 38 years old, my sister's son. I had hired him 12 years earlier when nobody else would touch him because he had bounced through 3 failed startups and 1 very expensive divorce before 40. I gave him a salary, an office, stability. He used to call me Aunt Helen with genuine affection. That night, he could barely hold eye contact with me. Halfway through dessert, David disappeared with him into the hallway. I watched through the open ballroom doors as they spoke in low voices beneath the hotel lights. Marcus rubbed his face hard with both hands. David kept glancing back toward the ballroom. Toward me. Then Marcus looked directly at me again. That same expression. Fear this time. Not fear of getting caught. Fear of what would happen if I knew. And this is where it changes. Because something inside me woke up in that moment. Not panic, not suspicion exactly, instinct. The same instinct that had kept my company alive during recessions and lawsuits and supply chain collapses, and the year we nearly lost everything because one warehouse fire took out 40% of our inventory. The instinct that notices smoke before anyone smells burning. I said nothing all evening. That part matters. People think strong women explode immediately when betrayed. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we become very quiet because we are counting exits and measuring walls and calculating damage before anyone realizes the building is unstable. I became quiet. David kissed my cheek during the final toast. "You did it," he whispered. His lips were warm from whiskey. His voice sounded almost sad. When the party finally ended, the hotel staff began clearing empty glasses while exhausted executives drifted toward elevators. I stood alone for 1 minute beside the stage after everyone else left. My photograph still glowed behind me. 31 years old, dark hair, cheap shoes, terrified eyes. I remembered the first office, a leaking ceiling, 2 folding chairs, no clients. I remembered eating vending machine crackers for dinner because every dollar mattered. I remembered David back then too, young, charming, encouraging, holding me while I cried from exhaustion after 18-hour days. I had built the company, but he had built the life around me while I did it. Or at least I believed that then. Back home, David went upstairs first, said he was exhausted, said too much champagne gave him headaches now. I stayed downstairs, removing earrings slowly in the kitchen, while the refrigerator hummed softly beside me. Midnight silence wrapped around the house. Then I noticed David's briefcase sitting beside the dining table, open slightly, papers visible inside. You need to understand something about me. I am not naturally suspicious. That was never my flaw. Trust was my flaw. But instinct had already started pulling at me by then, like a thread caught beneath a locked door. I walked over slowly. The leather smelled expensive and familiar. David had owned that briefcase for years. I remember touching the brass clasp and hesitating for half a second. Then I opened it. Most of the papers meant nothing immediately. Financial statements, insurance forms, legal correspondence. Then I saw my company logo, Marsh Biotech Solutions. My company? I pulled the document free carefully. At first, I thought it was some kind of tax filing. Dense legal language, signatures, corporate formatting. Then I saw Marcus's full name, Marcus Ellery, listed where mine should have been. I frowned and kept reading. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. My fingertips started tingling. There are moments when the human mind refuses reality at first. Not because reality is unclear, because it is too clear too quickly. I read the document once, then again, then a third time, 3 years ago. Ownership transfer, controlling interest reassigned, my shares removed. Marcus installed as majority owner, signed during the exact month I was receiving chemotherapy. I remember gripping the edge of the dining table because my knees weakened so suddenly I thought I might collapse. No. There had to be another explanation. Temporary medical protection, maybe. Estate planning, power of attorney adjustments. Then I found the signature page. David's name, signed cleanly in black ink, authorized representative. Below his signature was another one. Witness, Rita Lawson, my best friend. The room went silent in a way I cannot fully explain. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Rita knew. Rita signed it. And what the document revealed was not what I expected. It was so much worse because buried beneath the transfer paperwork was another clause, effective immediately and irrevocably. Irrevocably. My ownership had not been protected temporarily. It had been erased permanently. My phone rang in my hand so suddenly I almost dropped it. Rita, at 12:14 in the morning. I stared at her name glowing across the screen while my heartbeat slammed hard against my ribs. Then I answered. Her breathing came first, uneven, fearful. "Helen," she said softly, "before you do anything, I need to explain something." I said nothing. What I did, her voice cracked, I did because I was trying to save your life, not your company, your life. I did not answer Rita immediately because the problem with betrayal is that language stops working properly around it. Words become too small, too neat, too civilized for what your body is experiencing. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, while cold air moved softly from the vent above the sink. My retirement flowers still sat on the counter beside me. White roses, gold ribbon. Congratulations on your legacy. Legacy? I almost laughed. What exactly, I asked finally, did you think you were saving me from? Rita exhaled slowly. I could picture her perfectly even without seeing her, sitting upright in bed, one lamp on, glasses still on her face because she had known sleep was impossible tonight. Helen, please sit down before I explain this. I'm already sitting. That was a lie. I was still standing because some part of my body no longer trusted the ground. Silence stretched between us. Then Rita spoke quietly. During chemo, David thought you were dying. The sentence landed strangely, not because it hurt. Cancer teaches you early that everyone around you starts grieving before you are gone, sometimes before you are even close to gone. But there was something underneath her words, something unfinished. He told me your prognosis was worse than you knew, she continued. He said the doctors were preparing him privately. He was panicking about the company, taxes, probate, ownership complications. He thought transferring everything temporarily would protect it if, her voice faltered, if you died. I closed my eyes. The kitchen light suddenly felt painfully bright. What exactly did he tell you? That your treatment wasn't working. I swallowed hard. That wasn't true. I know that now. No. Rita, my voice sharpened. It wasn't true then either. Another silence. And this is where people misunderstand betrayal. They imagine it arrives with cruelty already visible. Most betrayals arrive disguised as concern, protection, fear, love twisted badly enough that it becomes dangerous. Rita continued speaking carefully, like someone walking across ice she knew might break. David genuinely believed he was protecting what you built. He kept saying you were too weak to handle legal complications, too exhausted, too sick. I looked down at the document again, irrevocably. What kind of protection permanently removes my name? I didn't understand the paperwork fully, she whispered. That hurt more than I expected, because Rita understood everything. Always. She had once caught accounting fraud in our second year of business, simply because a vendor invoice used the wrong font. She noticed details nobody else noticed. So if she signed without reading carefully, it meant one terrible thing. She trusted David more than she trusted her own instincts. The same mistake I made. You witnessed it, I said quietly. Yes, you watched him transfer my company while I was vomiting into hospital buckets. Helen, you watched him erase me. No. Her voice cracked hard enough that I knew she was crying now. No. I thought it was temporary. I thought he was trying to protect your estate while you were sick. I pressed my hand against my mouth suddenly because memory hit me so fast it almost knocked the air from my lungs. 3 years earlier. Hospital room. Rain against the windows. David holding paperwork beside my bed, saying softly, "Just routine legal cleanup. Don't worry about it." I had signed one page without reading because morphine blurred the lines and because my husband had kissed my forehead and said, "I'll handle everything." What I didn't know yet was that weak moments become permanent opportunities for the wrong people. You said temporary, I whispered, but it never changed back. No? Why? Rita inhaled shakily. That's the part I can't explain. I walked slowly into the living room. The house felt unfamiliar suddenly. Every framed photograph looked staged, every memory slightly unstable. Upstairs, I could hear faint movement. David, awake, maybe listening, maybe already knowing. When I recovered, I asked quietly, "Did you ever mention transferring it back?" "Yes." "And?" "He always had a reason." Rita sounded exhausted now. Tax timing, legal timing, corporate timing. He said Marcus was handling expansion well. He said the structure was cleaner this way. Cleaner? My company? My name removed for administrative convenience? I sat down finally. The couch leather felt cold against my skin. "You should have told me." "I know." "No." My voice dropped lower, more dangerous somehow because it stayed calm. "You need to understand this part very clearly. You should have told me immediately." I was afraid. Of David, of losing you. I almost snapped at her then, almost said something cruel. But grief has strange layers. Beneath my anger, I could hear something genuine in her voice. Shame, regret, human weakness, not malice. And somehow that hurt differently, because monsters are easier to hate than frightened people. "You stayed silent for 3 years." "Yes." "Why tonight?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Because Marcus looked sick all evening." That answer chilled me more than the documents. Not because of Marcus, because Rita had been watching too. Watching the secret crack open slowly. Watching it become unsustainable. "Helen," she whispered, "I never thought David would let it go this far." I looked upstairs again. Bedroom light now visible beneath the hallway door. Awake? Listening. My husband had spent 3 years sleeping beside me, knowing my company no longer legally belonged to me. You need to understand what that realization does to a person. Not rage first, humiliation first. I built that company through miscarriages and debt and 70-hour weeks and chemo treatments where I answered executive calls while poison dripped into my veins because payroll still had to happen and employees still needed leadership and suppliers still needed contracts signed. And all that time, ownership belonged to someone else. A nephew who smiled at me across conference tables while legally sitting in my chair. I stood again slowly. "Helen," Rita said carefully, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." That scares me. Good. Then I asked the question that had already started forming quietly beneath everything else. The question that mattered more than the paperwork, more than the fraud, more than the signatures. "Rita," I said softly, "when I recovered, did David seem disappointed?" Silence. Not immediate denial. Not confusion. Silence. 3 seconds. Long enough for truth to reveal itself completely without speaking. And that silence was its own answer. I hung up without another word. For a long time, I stood in the dark living room listening to the clock above the fireplace tick softly through the house David and I had shared for 34 years. Then I walked upstairs. David was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing his undershirt, reading glasses low on his nose. He looked up too quickly when I entered. That tiny reaction told me everything. He knew. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Too fast again." I closed the bedroom door behind me carefully. The air smelled faintly of his cologne and the lavender lotion I used during chemo because hospital smells stayed trapped in my brain afterward and I needed something softer nearby when I slept. I held up the documents. His face changed instantly. People think guilt looks dramatic. Usually it looks small, tiny muscle movements around the eyes, breathing shifts, the mouth tightening half a second too late. David's entire body understood disaster before his words did. "Helen, how long were you planning to let me retire from a company I didn't legally own?" He stood immediately. "Helen, listen to me." "No, you listen." My voice stayed calm. That frightened him more than screaming would have. I walked toward him slowly. 34 years together. Thousands of mornings. vacations, hospital rooms, shared bank accounts, shared grief, shared jokes nobody else understood. And suddenly I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. You transferred my company while I was in chemotherapy. It wasn't like that. That sentence usually means exactly like that. Helen, please. Did you think I was going to die? His eyes flickered. Too slow. Yes, he admitted quietly. At least that part was honest. And when I didn't, he rubbed his face hard with both hands. It became complicated. I almost laughed again. Complicated. Such an ordinary word for theft. What exactly became complicated? Returning what belonged to me. No, the business structure had already shifted by then. Marcus had taken operational control. Operational control is not ownership. I know that. Then explain it. He looked suddenly older than 63. Not evil, not monstrous. Weak? That was worse somehow. I was trying to protect everything, he whispered. From what? From collapse. From taxes. From probate. From losing the company if, he swallowed hard, if you died. But I didn't. No, the room went very still. What happened after that, David? He sat back down heavily, and finally the real fear entered his face. Because lies collapse under patient silence. I said nothing, so he kept talking. There were financial pressures. What financial pressures? Debt. I stared at him. What kind of debt? His silence answered before he did. Personal debt, not company debt. Oh my God. Helen? How much? He whispered the number. The room tilted. Not gambling exactly. Bad investments. Failed property deals. Loans refinanced repeatedly until the interest became unmanageable. All hidden. All secret. You used my company to pay your debt. No. Yes, Marcus helped stabilize things. There it is. David closed his eyes. Marcus had paid portions of the debt in exchange for ownership leverage. Temporary at first, then permanent, then hidden so deeply beneath legal paperwork that David convinced himself the truth no longer existed. What I didn't know yet, I said quietly, almost to myself, was that you weren't protecting the company from my death. David looked up slowly. You were protecting yourself from my survival. His face broke then. Not theatrically, just exhaustion finally collapsing inward. I never meant for this to happen. But it did. I thought I could fix it before you noticed. Before I noticed, I repeated softly. David, you transferred my life's work away while I was fighting cancer. Tears filled his eyes suddenly. I was terrified. So was I. That landed hard between us. Because cancer rearranges memory permanently. People remember bravery afterward. They forget terror. I remembered terror. The cold vinyl chairs. The metallic taste in my mouth after treatment. The nights I lay awake touching my own neck, checking for swollen lymph nodes, and beside me all that time slept a husband quietly giving away pieces of my life because he thought my future no longer mattered. Then something else occurred to me. Marcus knew. David looked away. How much did he know? Enough. I nodded slowly. Then I noticed his phone on the nightstand lighting up beside the bed. A message preview? Marcus. My stomach tightened instantly. David reached for it too late. I picked it up first. He stood quickly. Helen, don't. But I was already reading. She suspects something. What do we do if she finds the documents? Sent yesterday. Below it was David's response, sent 4 hours before my retirement party. She won't find them. She never looks that hard. For a moment, the entire world narrowed into silence. I read the message again. Then again, 34 years together. And this was who he believed I was. A woman who built an entire company from nothing, yet somehow never looked closely enough to protect herself. I lowered the phone slowly. David looked terrified now. Not of exposure, of understanding me too late. I looked at my husband for a very long time. Then finally I spoke. "You should know something, David." My voice was quiet enough that he leaned forward to hear it. I always looked that hard. His breathing stopped. "I built a company from nothing. I look at everything." I handed him the phone carefully. "I just trusted you enough to pretend I didn't." David sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone like it had become physically dangerous. His hands shook slightly now, not dramatically, tiny tremors around the fingers, the kind you only notice when you have loved someone long enough to recognize changes invisible to everyone else. And that realization hurt in a way I still struggle to describe. Because even after betrayal, intimacy remains. You still know how they breathe when frightened. You still know which shoulder aches in cold weather. You still know the exact expression they make before admitting something difficult. Love does not disappear cleanly. That is the cruel part. "What happens now?" he asked finally. The strange thing was that he sounded genuinely lost, as though consequences had somehow arrived unexpectedly. I looked around the bedroom slowly. The framed photographs, the heavy curtains, the chair where he slept beside me during recovery when pain medication made me hallucinate shadows in the corners of the room. How many moments had been real? How many had already contained the lie? "I don't know yet," I said, but that was not true. Some part of me already knew exactly what came next. Not revenge, precision. When you build a company from nothing, panic becomes a luxury you cannot afford. You learn to respond while bleeding. You learn to think while exhausted. You learn that emotional people lose negotiations. So I became very calm. David mistook that calm for softness at first. "Helen, maybe we can fix this privately." That sentence almost impressed me with its optimism. Privately? Yes, we can transfer things back quietly. Marcus will cooperate. Marcus will cooperate because Marcus knows he stole from me. It wasn't stealing. I looked at him until he regretted saying it. Then I walked into the bathroom and closed the door. Not to cry, to think. The marble counter felt cold beneath my fingertips. My reflection looked older than it had that morning. Not weaker, sharper somehow, like a photograph adjusted into focus. Cancer had already changed my face permanently. People never mention that part publicly because survivors are expected to look grateful instead of altered. My cheekbones sharper now, hair thinner around the temples even after growing back. A small scar near my collarbone where the port had been inserted. I touched that scar lightly. 3 years earlier, poison entered my body through that opening, while my husband transferred my future away in another office somewhere. You need to understand something. Illness exposes the architecture of every relationship around you. Who stays? Who disappears? Who quietly begins reorganizing life without you? I slept in the guest room that night. David knocked once around 3 in the morning. "Helen?" I did not answer. By sunrise, I had already made 2 decisions. First, I would not confront Marcus until I understood everything legally. Second, I needed a lawyer no one could manipulate emotionally. By 8:30, I was sitting in my car outside St. Catherine's Oncology Center, staring at my phone. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had during treatment. Gray concrete, wind pushing trash along the curb, nurses carrying paper coffee cups toward automatic doors. I almost drove away twice. Then I remembered something Dr. Patel once told me during chemo after I apologized for crying through an appointment. "You keep thinking strength means not needing help," he said. "That misunderstanding exhausts more women than cancer." So I walked inside. The reception desk smelled faintly like disinfectant and burnt coffee, familiar enough that my chest tightened instantly. Trauma lives in the body long after medicine leaves it. Dr. Patel looked older, too, more gray in his beard than before. His face softened immediately when he saw me. "Helen Marsh," he said warmly. "Retirement already?" "Apparently not." Something in my expression made him close the office door after I explained. He listened without interrupting once. That mattered. Most people interrupt women during pain because they are uncomfortable hearing it unfold completely. When I finished, he sat back quietly. Then he said something unexpected. "I know someone." I frowned. "A lawyer." Of all the things I expected from my oncologist, that was not one of them. "She represented my sister during a corporate fraud case 2 years ago," he continued. "Best attorney I've ever seen. Young, ruthless in the correct ways, and more importantly," he paused, "she doesn't intimidate easily." I almost smiled despite myself. "Neither do I." "I know." He handed me a card. "That's why I think you'll like her. Sarah Whitmore. Corporate litigation. Simple black lettering. No decorative nonsense." "What's she like?" Dr. Patel actually laughed softly. "She reminds me of surgeons, very calm, while everyone else panics." 2 hours later, I sat across from Sarah in an office overlooking downtown glass towers and traffic below. 34 years old, dark suit, no wedding ring, direct eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The first thing she did was read every page silently for 23 straight minutes without speaking once. The second thing she did was ask for coffee. Not because she needed it, because she wanted time to think before talking. That told me I had chosen correctly. "What's your initial impression?" I asked finally. Sarah stirred cream into her coffee slowly. "My initial impression is that your husband and nephew are either astonishingly careless or astonishingly arrogant." Something cold and steady settled inside me hearing that. Validation, not emotional comfort. Recognition of reality. Sarah spread the documents carefully across the conference table. "3 major problems immediately," she said. "First, your husband signed authority he likely did not possess legally. Second, the transfer timing during medical incapacity creates vulnerability. Third, she tapped Marcus's signature. Your nephew accepted controlling ownership under circumstances any competent attorney would consider questionable. So it can be reversed?" "Oh, yes." Her eyes lifted toward mine. "The transfer is legally vulnerable." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. But Sarah was not finished. "However," there is always a however, "the larger issue is intent." She stood and walked toward the window, holding one document between 2 fingers. "If this was panic-driven estate protection during a medical crisis, courts view it one way. If this was concealment for financial gain," she looked back at me, "that becomes something else entirely." I thought about David's debt, Marcus's messages, the retirement party. She was supposed to be dead. I did not realize I had spoken aloud until Sarah turned sharply. "What?" I looked down at the table. "My husband hid debt. Marcus paid portions of it. The company became payment." My voice sounded strange now, detached. "I think they assumed I would die before I recovered enough to notice." Sarah became very still. Then she sat down again slowly. "Did your husband say that directly?" "No." But you believe it?" "Yes." She nodded once, then continued reviewing papers. Minutes passed. Traffic moved below the windows in silent lines. And this is where it changes again, because Sarah suddenly stopped reading. Not dramatically, just complete stillness. Her eyes narrowed at a much older document buried beneath the transfer paperwork. "What is it?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she slid the page carefully free. Yellowed edges, Original incorporation filing, 30 years old. I recognized my younger signature instantly. Back when my hand still looped letters too widely because I was nervous signing official documents, Sarah read silently another minute. Then she looked up slowly. "Well," she said quietly, "that's interesting." My heartbeat quickened again. "What?" "There's a clause here." "What kind of clause?" "A founder protection clause." I frowned. I barely remember drafting those documents. Apparently, your original attorney was smarter than everyone involved afterward. She turned the document toward me and pointed carefully. The wording took me 2 readings to understand. Then the meaning hit me all at once. No transfer of majority ownership shall occur without direct written reaffirmation by the founding principal during periods of medical incapacitation or diminished competency. I stared at the sentence. Sarah's voice became almost clinical now. Your husband legally could not authorize this transfer without your direct reaffirmation after recovery. The room tilted slightly again. They never reversed it. No. Sarah folded her hands carefully, which means this was not merely unethical. I looked up slowly. Sarah placed the document in front of me. They didn't just take your company, she said quietly. They committed fraud. The word landed heavily between us. Fraud, not misunderstanding, not estate confusion. Fraud. And I can prove it, she continued calmly, in approximately 3 weeks. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected hard against neighboring buildings. 30 years. My company, my name, everything suddenly standing on one terrible sentence. The question is, Sarah said carefully, how far do you want to take this? I answered without hesitation. As far as it goes? Her expression changed slightly then. Not surprise exactly. Respect? It could go to criminal court? Good. Sarah studied me for a long second. Then something almost like admiration crossed her face. One more thing, she said. What? Marcus called me this morning before you did. The room went cold again. He offered me the case. I turned him down. She paused carefully. I need you to know that because what I'm about to tell you is something he said to convince me you wouldn't fight. I felt suddenly very still. Sarah held my gaze directly. He said, she survived cancer. She won't have the energy for this. Silence filled the office. I looked down slowly at my own hands. The same hands that signed payroll during chemotherapy. The same hands that pulled hair from shower drains in clumps while still attending board meetings. The same hands that built everything they thought illness had weakened permanently. Sarah's voice softened slightly. I thought you should know what they think of you. I looked back up, and for the first time since the retirement party, I smiled. Not warmly, not kindly. Just enough for Sarah to understand exactly what kind of mistake they had made. The first person served was David. Sarah arranged it deliberately. Why? I asked when she explained the timing. Because your husband still believes this is emotional, she said. I want him to understand it's procedural now. There is something terrifying about legal paperwork arriving at your front door in broad daylight. Not dramatic. Not cinematic, just a man in a gray jacket holding an envelope while neighbors water plants nearby and traffic moves normally down the street. Consequences rarely arrive with thunder. Usually they arrive Tuesday afternoon around 2:30. I was not home when David got served. Sarah insisted on that too. You don't need to watch the first impact, she told me. You need to survive the long war after it. So I sat instead in my restored temporary office downtown, while rain streaked slowly down the windows and employees avoided looking directly at me because rumors had already started moving through the company. People always know before official statements do, especially in companies built like families. especially when betrayal smells this strong. At 2:47, my phone rang. David, I let it ring twice before answering. Helen? His voice sounded smaller somehow. Not angry, panicked. You had me served. Yes. You're filing criminal allegations? Yes. Long silence. Helen, please. That word almost undid me, because for 34 years that voice had meant something entirely different. Please used to mean stay close. Please used to mean help me. Please used to mean love me through this. Now it meant save me from consequences. You should have thought about this before transferring my company while I was unconscious from chemotherapy. It wasn't like that. I closed my eyes briefly. Even now he still needed the lie softened. You keep saying that, I replied quietly, but every document says otherwise. I was scared, and I was dying. Silence. Then finally, what do you want from me? The question surprised me, because it revealed something important. David still thought this was negotiable emotionally, as though enough sadness might replace accountability. I want my name back, I said. Everything else comes afterward. Helen, no, listen carefully now, because this is the last time I explain it gently. My voice stayed perfectly calm. You gambled with 30 years of my life because you thought illness made me weak. You involved my nephew. You lied beside me while I recovered. And worst of all, I swallowed once. You watched me thank people at my retirement party for a company you already knew legally belonged to someone else. His breathing caught. That landed. Good. Then I ended the call. Marcus called 20 minutes later. I almost ignored him. Almost. But some part of me needed to hear how he would justify himself now that exposure had arrived completely. Aunt Helen, no? Silence. Then quietly, Helen, better. What do you want? I never wanted this to happen. Interesting sentence. Not I didn't do it. Not I was wrong. Just I never wanted consequences. You accepted ownership. It was complicated. You keep using words that mean nothing. He exhaled hard into the phone. I helped save the company. You helped buy it. That's not fair. I laughed softly then. Not because anything was funny. Because fairness was suddenly being discussed by a man who signed documents transferring his aunt's life work while she sat attached to IV poison. You knew I was sick. Yes. You knew I didn't understand what was happening. Long silence. Helen, you knew. Yes. There it was. Finally. Truth stripped clean. Rain tapped softly against my office windows. Below me, the city moved normally while my entire marriage collapsed quietly in real time. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. And this is where people expect forgiveness scenes. Movies train us badly that way. They think apologies create bridges automatically. Sometimes apologies simply confirm guilt. What exactly are you sorry for? I asked. That it happened? No. My voice sharpened. What exactly are you sorry for? He struggled then. I could hear it happening, because honest remorse requires precision. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry I accepted something that belonged to you. That was the first truthful sentence he had spoken. I leaned back slowly in my chair. You know what the worst part is? I asked quietly. What? I loved you. Silence again. When your father died, I continued, I paid your college tuition because family mattered to me. When your first business failed, I hired you because family mattered to me. I sat beside your hospital bed after your car accident because family mattered to me. My throat tightened hard suddenly, and all this time you were sitting in meetings beside me already legally owning my chair. Helen, please. No. You don't get to ask for mercy from the person you buried professionally while she fought cancer. He started crying then. Actual crying. Not manipulation. Not performance. Too late. I'll cooperate, he whispered. You already will, I said. Sarah made that very clear. Then I ended the call too. Afterward, I sat alone in silence for a long time. Not triumphant, just tired in a new way. Cancer exhausts the body. Betrayal exhausts reality itself. You stop knowing which memories remain safe to touch. A week later, Rita testified voluntarily. That mattered more than she knew. Sarah called me immediately afterward. She was devastating. I closed my office door before answering. What did she say? The truth. Simple, precise. Rita confirmed David misrepresented my prognosis, confirmed the transfer occurred during active treatment, confirmed concerns were raised later about reversing ownership after recovery. Every careful sentence drove another nail into David's defense. Was she angry? I asked quietly. No. Sarah paused. Honestly? She sounded heartbroken. That hurt unexpectedly, because despite everything, I missed her. Human beings are inconvenient that way. Love and anger occupy the same room sometimes. 3 Thursdays later, Rita asked if we could meet for coffee. I nearly refused. Then I remembered something chemo taught me. Avoiding pain does not heal it. So I went. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans and wet coats from the rain outside. Rita already sat near the window, turning her coffee cup slowly between both hands when I arrived. Older, smaller somehow. Guilt changes posture. I didn't know if you'd come, she admitted softly. I almost didn't. Fair? We sat in silence a while. Not hostile, just honest. Finally, she looked at me carefully. You look stronger. I am stronger. She nodded once, like that answer hurt, but also relieved her somehow. I should have told you immediately. Yes. I was afraid you'd fall apart. That sentence stayed between us quietly. Then I shook my head. No, I said. You were afraid I wouldn't. Her eyes filled instantly. Because there it was. The truth neither of us had fully spoken aloud yet. Everyone around illness starts making assumptions about survival, about energy, about capacity, about who becomes fragile permanently. They mistook exhaustion for surrender. I hated myself every day, Rita whispered. I know. You know? Yes. I stirred my coffee slowly. You've looked miserable for 3 years. A broken laugh escaped her unexpectedly. Then tears followed immediately after. I loved you, she whispered. I know that too, and I still failed you. Yes, there are conversations adulthood rarely prepares you for. This was one of them. No screaming, no dramatic reconciliation. Just 2 women old enough to understand that love and failure sometimes coexist in the same action. I don't know what we are now, Rita admitted. Neither do I. That was the truth. But truth, I was learning, is more survivable than performance. Outside, the rain slowed gradually against the windows. Inside the cafe, people laughed at other tables, unaware 2 lives were being quietly reconstructed 3 feet away from them. What happens next? Rita asked. I looked out at the street for a moment before answering. Consequences. And consequences came, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, relentlessly. Marcus resigned before formal removal proceedings completed because Sarah made continuation impossible. David's financial records surfaced next, then emails, then signatures, then timelines no defense attorney could explain cleanly. The company board restored my executive authority before the settlement even finalized because panic spreads quickly when fraud enters public records. Employees stopped meeting David's eyes in hallways. That part mattered to him more than the money. Shame often arrives socially before legally. 3 months into proceedings, Sarah walked into my office carrying settlement papers thick enough to feel heavy in both hands. It's done, she said simply. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Completely as these things ever become. Nothing unwinds perfectly. Not companies, not marriages, not betrayals, but enough returned. My ownership restored. Financial damages awarded. Marcus removed permanently. David's role entered public record exactly as Sarah promised. Not erased. Documented. Truth matters differently when written down officially. That evening, after everyone left, I remained alone in my office while sunset dimmed slowly across the city outside. My office again. My name restored on the glass door. Helen Marsh, founder and CEO. I stared at those words for a very long time. 30 years, cancer, fraud, survival. The room smelled faintly like paper and rain and old coffee. Familiar, real. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. A young woman's voice came through uncertainly. Is this Helen Marsh? Yes. The Helen Marsh who started this company 30 years ago? Yes. A nervous breath. I'm sorry to call so late. My name is Anna. I read what happened to you. She hesitated. I'm 29. I have a business idea and no one will back me and I didn't know who else to call. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Outside my office door, my restored name reflected softly against dark glass. I know it's strange, she continued quickly. I just thought, if anyone would understand starting from nothing. 30 years disappeared suddenly. I remembered myself at 31. Cheap shoes, secondhand desk, no investors willing to listen seriously because women with ambition frightened people more back then. Maybe they still did. I looked again at my name on the door. Then I smiled softly into the phone. Anna, I said, how soon can you come in? Silence. Then stunned laughter. Really? Yes. Why? Because I have been where you are, I thought. Because survival changes the obligation you feel toward other women standing at beginnings. Because people tried to erase me and failed. Because maybe this is how rebuilding starts. I have some things to tell you, I said quietly, about what starting from nothing actually means. I looked once more at the office around me, at everything they thought I was too tired to fight for. It does not mean what they told you, I said. It means something so much better. 1 year later, the company finally felt like mine again. Not legally. That happened months earlier. Emotionally, there is a difference. After betrayal, familiar places become contaminated for a while. Conference rooms remember arguments. Hallways remember whispers. Even your own office can feel temporarily occupied by ghosts of the person you used to be before trust broke open beneath your feet. But time does something quiet and powerful. It restores ownership inside the body first. Then everywhere else follows. The building smelled different that spring morning. Fresh paint in the lobby, new carpeting upstairs. Anna's ridiculous vanilla coffee drifting beneath office doors because she insisted caffeine tasted better when it smelled like dessert. I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. That surprised me sometimes still. Not the smile itself, the ease of it. Anna arrived exactly 4 days after our first phone call, carrying a laptop bag held together with safety pins and the exhausted determination of someone used to being underestimated. I recognized her immediately, not personally, historically. Women like us recognize each other on sight. She spoke too fast during our first meeting because nervous ambition always speeds up language. Her business model had flaws. Her projections were overly hopeful. Her branding needed work. But the core idea was good. More importantly, she was relentless. You cannot teach relentlessness. I invested personally 2 months later. Not a fortune. Enough to turn possibility into momentum. The day we finalized paperwork, she stared at my signature for a long moment before looking up. You really believe this can work? I almost answered with numbers. Revenue models, market expansion, consumer trends. Instead, I told her the truth. I believe you will survive failure if it doesn't. That mattered more. Anna cried unexpectedly after that. So did I later in private. Because what I didn't know yet was how healing it would feel to place belief back into someone instead of defending yourself from betrayal constantly. David and I separated quietly. No screaming, no dramatic scenes, no final explosion, just paperwork. Distance, the slow understanding that some damage alters structure permanently. People kept asking if I hated him. I didn't. Hatred requires sustained emotional investment, and by then I was simply clear. Clarity is colder than anger sometimes. We met twice after the settlement finished, once regarding property division, once because 34 years together deserved at least one honest goodbye. He looked older both times. Smaller, too. Consequences age people. Helen, he said during our final conversation, I did love you. I believed him. That was the tragedy. Love alone does not prevent destruction. Weakness can ruin people just as thoroughly as cruelty. I know, I replied quietly. Then, after a long silence, I added, but you loved your fear more. He cried after that. I didn't, not because I felt nothing, because grief had already completed most of its work by then. Rita and I started having coffee every Thursday, not to repair the friendship artificially, to rebuild something more honest from what survived. It became less comfortable, more real. Sometimes we talked about the case, sometimes we refused to mention it entirely. Sometimes we sat in silence watching people cross rainy sidewalks outside cafe windows while old music played softly overhead. One Thursday, she finally asked the question she had been carrying for months. Will you ever trust me again? I thought about it carefully before answering. Not the way I used to. She nodded slowly. Then I continued, but maybe that's healthier for both of us? Her eyes filled immediately, because there it was again. Truth. Before all this happened, our friendship contained performance too. Small dishonesties, avoided confrontations, protective silence pretending to be kindness. Now it contained accuracy. And accuracy, strangely enough, created something sturdier. Sarah became the company's permanent legal counsel 6 months after settlement. Best decision I ever made. She frightened board members productively. More importantly, she said exactly what she meant at all times. No manipulation, no emotional camouflage, no softening dangerous information to protect feelings. The first time she interrupted an executive mid-meeting with, "That statement is legally indefensible and strategically stupid," I nearly laughed out loud. Afterward, she looked concerned. Was that too direct? No, I said. It was beautiful. We worked well together because neither of us wasted language anymore. Pain simplifies communication eventually. One evening near closing time, Sarah stood in my office doorway holding revised contracts, while Anna argued loudly with a supplier on speakerphone down the hall. You built an interesting workplace, Sarah observed dryly. I looked around slowly. Employees moving quickly, lights glowing warm against evening windows, Anna pacing furiously with a notebook in hand. My name on the office door. Mine. Still mine. Yes, I said softly. I did. Sarah studied me a second longer. Then she smiled very slightly before leaving. That moment stayed with me afterward for reasons I still cannot fully explain. Maybe because survival feels loneliest, right before you realize you are no longer surviving anymore. You are living again. And this is the part nobody explains properly about betrayal. It changes your vision permanently, not into bitterness if you survive it correctly, into clarity. You stop mistaking silence for loyalty. You stop mistaking charm for character. You stop mistaking exhaustion for weakness. Cancer taught me my body could fail me temporarily. What happened afterward taught me people could too. But both experiences revealed something else underneath all that damage. Me, still there, still capable of building, still capable of choosing carefully who deserved access to my life. 1 year after the settlement, I arrived early one morning before anyone else entered the building. Sunlight spilled gold across empty hallways. Cleaning staff had already left. The entire office hummed softly with machinery and distant ventilation. I unlocked my office door myself, something I insisted on doing now. Inside, everything waited exactly where I left it. Desk, photographs, contracts, coffee cup, my name etched into glass outside. I sat down slowly. 30 years earlier, I had started with one folding table and no certainty whatsoever except refusal to quit. Now here I was, 61 years old, cancer survivor, founder, fraud victim, still standing. I thought about the retirement party sometimes still. Marcus's guilty face, David whispering in corners, Rita watching silently. My own instincts waking up before evidence arrived. What saved me finally was not intelligence, not anger, attention. I noticed the truth before I understood it. Women survive by noticing. They thought surviving cancer had made me tired. It had made me the opposite. When you have sat in a chair and been told your body is trying to kill you, and you have looked back at it and decided, not today, you do not emerge from that with less fight. You emerge from it knowing exactly what you are willing to fight for and what you are not. I fought for my name on that door, not for pride, not for revenge. Because 30 years ago, a 31-year-old woman built something from nothing and she deserved to have her name on it. She still does. She always will. That woman was me. And I am still here. If Helen's story found you today, share it with someone who needs to remember what they built and who they are. We will be here next week. Another story, another woman, another life quietly unbroken.